I'm in the Portlands, where a major transformation is underway, and it's not the first time we've transformed this area. So, let's dig in. To me, the Portlands have always seemed like a bit of an industrial wasteland, but they weren't always that way, and they're becoming less that way, thanks in large part to a project called the Portlands Flood Protection Project, run by Waterfront Toronto, an agency of all three levels of government. So, let's start by looking at some of what's new. There are 4 of these new bridges that were installed starting in 2020. They're stylish, they're colorful, and they make for neat photos. These bridges were built in Nova Scotia, although there was nobody in Canada that could shape the steel for the arches into the complex curves at the size required. So that work was actually done in a shipyard in the Netherlands. And then the arches were brought back to Nova Scotia, the bridges were assembled, and they were brought here to Toronto on barges. This pair of bridges are the new Cherry Street North bridges crossing over the Keating Channel. But wait, didn't Cherry Street already have a bridge crossing over the Keating Channel? Yes, it did. That was a lift bridge built in 1968. It was old and unreliable. It even got stuck in the open position for a while back in 2019. So it was in need of replacement. Also, these bridges are about 100 meters west of the old location, as Cherry Street has been relocated during this project. There's a pair of bridges here. As you can see, the other one is for road traffic, and this one is for future transit use. We'll get to that in a bit. I'm on Leslie Street, just south of Lakeshore Boulevard, and I'm standing on solid ground. But if I'd been here a little over a century ago, I would have been standing in a marsh with Ashbridge's Bay just a little bit to the south of me. As you can see on the map, Ashbridge's Bay today is pretty small, but when I add a 1906 map of the area, you can see a big difference. Ashbridge's Bay back then was huge, covering most of today's Portlands, and it was a mixture of open water and marshy areas. Apparently, at the time, it was the largest wetland on the Great Lakes. Also on the 1906 map, have a look at the mouth of the Don River, where it turns to the west and empties into the inner harbor north of the Keating Channel. It's about a century since it's been like that. I'm standing alongside the Keating Channel. I've been here before in my video on the lower Don River. There's a magic link up there, and I'll put a link down in the description so you can find it when you've finished watching this video. Off in the distance behind me, you can see the new Cherry Street North bridges. And I had mentioned that they're not in the same location as the old Cherry Street Bridge. Across the channel here, you can see the abutment from the old bridge. We've changed the course of the lower Don River and where its mouth is located a number of times over the years. At one point, it used to flow into Toronto Harbor a little bit north of here. Then in 1886, we undertook a project to straighten and channelize the lower Don River, as you can see in this map, not only to improve the flow, but also to create additional dock space along the sides of the river. Along with that, we connected the mouth of the river into the Ashbridge's Bay marshes in an effort to flush out the pollution that was plaguing the marshes. But since we were dumping human waste and industrial pollution into the Don River, it's not surprising that that didn't fix the problem. The next thing we tried was the Keating Channel, named after city engineer Edward Keating. This connected the harbor to the marshes and was intended to increase the flow of water in the marshes and hopefully flush out some of the pollution. But again, since we were dumping raw sewage and industrial waste, and there's only so much that improved circulation can do, that didn't fix the problem either. So our next idea, fill in the marsh. And by the 1920s, the marshes have been filled in, creating the Portlands more or less as we know them today. In addition to straightening and channelizing the Don River and cutting the Keating Channel, we also connected the Don River to the Keating Channel, so that the Keating Channel became the mouth of the Don River. And it turns out that wasn't the greatest idea either. One of the main points of channelizing and straightening the river is to improve flow so that it won't flood as easily. And that's fine, except all it means is that the water quickly ends up somewhere else. And if the somewhere else is a 90-degree bend, Well, water doesn't flow that well around 90-degree bends, which is probably why Mother Nature doesn't design most rivers that way. So it tends to back up and flood here instead. It also tends to dump a lot of silt. Every year, tens of thousands of cubic meters of silt are dredged out of the lower river and the Keating Channel and used as fill along the Leslie Street spit, as I mentioned in my earlier video on landfills in Toronto. Links in the usual places. So, once again, we're making changes to the river, but this time it seems we may have learned our lesson. Over the last few years, a new channel for the river has been dug through the Portlands, heading south from where it currently meets the Keating Channel, then turning west and emptying into the inner harbour via the Polson Street slip. This new channel meanders, like a real river, and instead of being essentially a rectangular box made of steel and concrete, it has banks that are made of rocks and soil and vegetation and stuff, like a real river. The goal is to provide an environment that will do more to mitigate flooding and also provide a more inviting habitat for nature. There are also a couple of extra outlets that can be used in times of high flow to mitigate flooding. One of them is where the New River Channel goes past the Keating Channel. Once the New River is connected to the new channel, there will be a weir in place at that location, which will normally keep the river and the Keating Channel separate. But when there's a high flow in the river, some of it can flow over the weir and exit out through the Keating Channel as a second exit. There's a third one as well. Where the river channel turns and heads west, there's a new wetland, and again, there's a weir there, and in times of high flow, water can flow there into the wetland, which then empties into the shipping channel to the south.
Starting in 2023, the new channel was gradually filled with water, giving the land time to settle and adjust. The plan was to pump water in, but nature had other ideas, and water started leaking in, but they just reduced how much they were pumping to account for that. In early July 2024, the plug at the harbor end was removed. As I make this video in late July, the plug at the north end is still there. It's planned to be removed around November, and the Don will then flow through its new course. If you're wondering how this worked in July's big flood, well, the river was still only connected to the Keating Channel, but it wouldn't have stopped the Don Valley Parkway from flooding anyway. It's low in the floodplain, and this project isn't designed to fix that. It's mainly intended to protect the Portlands, not so much for areas upriver, and not at all for things right at the bottom of the valley, like the DVP or the Richmond Hill GO line.
Earlier in the video, I referred to the Portlands as something of an industrial wasteland, and it kind of looks like it. But it's more than just looks. This area has a long history of industrial uses, including power generation, waste incineration, cement manufacturing, and petrochemical industries. And that's left a legacy of pollution. Work is underway to clean that up, not just because of the principle that we ought to clean up our own messes, but also because redevelopment plans for this area call for something like 30,000 jobs, 25,000 people in new homes, and a number of public parks. And it's not a good idea to build that stuff on contaminated land. Those of you who are into the Toronto area in the 70s and 80s will probably recall news reports about our neighbors in Niagara Falls, New York, who built a neighborhood called Love Canal on top of a toxic waste dump. Bad idea. That's how you get mutants. There's not a lot of transit connectivity in this area. There are a few bus routes that run through on not very frequent service. And there are plans in the works to expand that. And a couple of the ideas include extending the streetcar line south on Cherry Street from its current end at the Distillery Loop and building a waterfront east line similar to the one that runs west along the waterfront from Union Station. But this is Toronto, where we rarely even have the money to maintain the transit infrastructure we already have, let alone build new infrastructure. Even though at the Cherry Street North location there are two bridges, one of which is expressly intended for transit, and they've made provisions to add transit bridges to the other two locations where the new bridges went in. Anyway, we'll see what happens. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this trip through the Portlands to hear a little bit about the history and find out what's been changing. If you did, you know what to do. Please like and subscribe.